So here's the thing, if you watched our review of the Hegel H390, you already know the big takeaway of that thing is both beauty and beast. It sounds smooth, and it has a refined top end, and it never sounds forward or edgy. At the same time, if you watched our review of the Yamaha AS2200, you already know that the key points of that bad boy is that it's rock and roll. With a lively and exciting top end and perhaps a little more spark in the upper mid-range, that amp is almost the opposite of the Hegel sound. I suppose this begs the question, Ron, is there an amplifier out there that might sit right in the middle of those two? Well, I'm glad you asked there, Cupcake, and with a warm welcome back to New Record Day. That's exactly what we're going to find out. Taking a look at the Michi X3 from the front, you are greeted with a minimal faceplate that certainly looks the business. Smack dab in the middle, you will find one button for power. To the left, there is a knob for changing inputs, while on the knob to the right is demanding you to do one and only one thing, which is to turn it up. On the business end, on the top bank, you will find 4 single-ended inputs, dual mono subwoofer outputs, pre-outs, and a set of balanced inputs. On the middle bank, you will find all of your digital and networking jacks, which include optical, coaxial, USB, Ethernet, 12-volt trigger ports, and a couple of ports for servicing. On the bottom bank, you have monster-sized jacks for speaker terminals and a typical IEC for power. The Michi X3 comes with an impressive remote that is made mostly of metal, feels substantial in the hands, and gives you complete control over everything that you need to access within the amplifier. Now, because the Michi X3 is Roon tested and certified, this made it easy peasy to get this thing up and running. Using the PC USB input on the back, I was able to access my Roon library, which is how I mostly listen to the Michi X3. Being in the mood to play some records, I also ran the Pure Fidelity Harmony to the auxiliary inputs of the X3, being fed from the KTE LCR1 Mark V phono preamp, which you can pick up at Holo Audio. And with that, I know what you're thinking. Why didn't I just go straight into the phono input of the X3? That's a great question, and I want to explain. While this amp does feel equipped for the future when it comes to its digital topology, one thing that I was surprised to see was Rotel only offered listeners a moving magnet option for its phono section.
What did you say?
Being honest, I feel like this was a swing and a miss, as so many listeners that I talk to who are buying an integrated amplifier are indeed looking for a one-and-done solution, meaning they don't want to keep buying more stuff. So yeah, if you hit the checkout button on the X3 and are hoping it will play nice with your moving coil cartridge, you could do it, but it would require a step-up transformers and buying more stuff. Also, I use the NUOS Zenith with the new NUOS Sense app, and also dabbled with streaming straight to the amp using Bluetooth. Across the board, every function on the amplifier worked perfect without an issue, except for one small hiccup. For some reason, the X3 wouldn't detect my NUOS Zenith 100% of the time. There were a couple of instances where I had to reseat the USB to get it to find the Zenith. This was never a deal breaker for me, but knowing the price tag of this beast, a cool 5,000 smackaroos, I think that it's certainly something that you should know. Oh, the speakers that we used throughout the audition were, of course, the Spatial Audio M3 Sapphires. They're my reference. And if you are curious, that combo sounded just fine to this old cowboy. So yeah, let's chat about that. The first time that I played back some reference tracks from my playlist, it occurred to me that first, this isn't the amp that I would think about when I'm thinking about Rotel. Now, don't get me wrong, there's nothing necessarily wrong with Rotel, but to me, they've always been one of those brands that, I don't know, appears to be safe. Nothing in their lineup really stood out to me as, wow, now that is something that I gotta hear. With the Michi line, it's clearly a different animal, and I think I heard all the hard work that they put into that amplifier right away. In a word, this amp sounds powerful. That's right. The Michi X3 is eager to impress with projecting a large, spacious soundstage with truckloads of dynamic content. While I'd make the case that the Hegel H390 placed a little more emphasis in the lower bandwidth than the X3, the Michi was surely no slouch in any department. At the same time, it never seemed to sound quite as forward or exciting as the Yamaha AS2200, which quickly told me this amp might be the middleman between those two amplifiers, and it might be a great pick for someone who is looking for something in the neutral category. So with that being said, let's break this down and walk through the specifics. Here at NRD, we do away with chatting about treble impressions for 45 minutes and tend to focus on what we describe here as the time domain. Yes, treble performance is directly tied to this attribute, but the key difference is that we are focusing our attention on the time-related details. With the Michi X3, the amp does perform really well in this department, and it sounds very open on top. When you hear the drummer smacking the hi-hat, it sounds airy, crisp, and clean. Even more, when that same drummer is smashing the crash, it sounds ballsy and dynamic, as it should. In both cases, I was able to hear the initial hit, the decay, and the harmonic structure of both cymbals. Meaning, we ain't talking about snakes hissing here. There was clear and concise pitch differences, and establishing those differences with the X3 is no problem at all. While not a relaxed top end and not a forward or bright sounding amplifier, the X3 does indeed sit in the middle, which is not a bad thing at all. To me, a lot of audiophiles who quite frankly don't know exactly what they want, and that's a lot of us, would be wise to start their foundation with neutral sounding gear. The X3 is one of those amplifiers, and it reminded me that having some latitude regardless of the direction that you want to take your rig is a wise thing to consider when shopping for new gear. Now, as we move from the time domain into mid-range, most of everything we just said does apply with only one minor disclaimer, so let's chat about that. The overall tone print of the X3's midband performance, to me, sounds very balanced. I didn't notice anything that tilted or voiced in a way to emphasize one thing over the other. As we move lower into male vocals, everything that I tossed at the X3 sounded clean with loads of detailed information. That is to say, I was able to sit back in my fancy pants listening chair and literally draw lines around the lead vocals track after track. Also, there seemed to be a powerful driving force behind the vocals as well. Whether it's Lane Staley or Neil Young, vocals punch through the mix without even trying, giving a sense of the singer stepping up to the mic and belting it out. Now, the disclaimer. If there was one, I would say that I noticed as we climb higher out of the reach of male vocals and into female vocals, the X3 didn't have the same projection that I noticed in the lower mid-range. I listened to track after track of my favorite female artist, Dominique Fils-Aimé, and so many more, and with her and many other vocals, it sounded a tad softer and perhaps slightly thinner than other systems that I have spent time with. I am probably picking flies out of horse turds. It's something my dad used to say. I don't have a clue what it means, but it's just funny. We are talking about very minor and very nitpicky observations here. It's entirely possible that you wouldn't even notice what I'm rambling about, but you guys know me. I'll report what I hear, and I will turn over every stone that I can. The bass on the X3 is indeed a sledgehammer. Similar to what I heard with the H390, the X3 will help shake the clothes off your partner, knock down walls, and so much more. We should probably send one of these over to Russia about now. A little present. We should do that. When you have this kind of power on tap, it's fun and it is exhilarating. At the same time, the bass doesn't sound like someone drenched your favorite dish with too much salt. When the bass is called for, it's there and it's ready to smack you in the noggin, but it won't hit you harder than it should. Thinking it through, the bass performance and only the bass performance sounds identical to the Yamaha AS2200 that we reviewed while everything above the bass is quite different. So yeah, go back and watch that review where I talked about the bass performance and trusted everything that I said there. It also applies here. Now, with the Hegel H390, I don't think that it necessarily offered more bass or elevated bass, but to me, it sounds a little more dense, and it emphasized something in the lower frequencies in its tone structure. It almost sounds as if the H390 is a little bit smoother as we get lower in frequencies, which indeed makes it sound, well, different. The staging capabilities of the X3 is pretty impressive. While I would make the argument it's more about the dynamic content offered inside the stage and less about just how big and open and holographic that the stage feels, make no mistake, the X3 offers a deep and wide landscape to work with. Playing back a number of reference tracks that show off stage information, I felt the X3 keeps pace with some of the biggest sounding amps that I have ever heard. However, and this is what I want to emphasize, is that while the stage is large, the dynamics and excitement offered in the mix is what impressed me the most with the X3. Whether it's Angus Young smacking around his JTM 45 or Eric Clapton playing Tears in Heaven on a Martin, the instruments and vocals all have a sense of energy and liveliness that I really appreciated with this amplifier. In a nutshell, in the event where you have some room to play with, where you happen to listen, whether it's a listening room or not, and you have used lots to position your loudspeakers, as you should, I can assure you the X3 is going to knock your socks off with just how lively a performance can sound within the given stage. So yeah, it's one heck of an amplifier. This is not your typical Rotel amplifier, and it's an easy recommendation. I do wish that the amp offered a moving coil option for those that play records, but that's a minor setback. I can't think of anything else about this amplifier that really bummed me out. Note what I had to say about female vocals and take it with a grain of salt. On its sonic performance across the board, it sounds incredibly neutral, and I wouldn't be shocked at all if this would be the ideal amplifier for audiophiles who don't know exactly what they want. That's the review. See you in the next video.